I'll never forget the way he said it. We were sitting across from each other at the mediation table, cold coffee between us, two lawyers, and way too many lies. And with that same smug tone he used when he flirted with waitresses in front of me, my husband Bryce leaned back in his chair and said, "Let her take the kid. I'll keep my reputation." I didn't flinch. I had promised myself no more reacting, no more tears he could call hysterical, no more anger he could spin as emotional instability. I just stared back at him, calm, still. But inside, my hands were trembling under the table, and that's when his father, Gerald, the patriarch of perfection and passive-aggressive cruelty, chuckled and said, "She can have the mistake she made." They were talking about my son, Jaden, 11 years old, quiet, smart, careful with his words. Too careful sometimes. The kind of kid who watches people. Not just what they say, but how they say it. The kind of kid who grew up with a dad who lied for a living, and knew it. I looked over at Jaden, sitting in the hallway with my sister, sketching on his iPad. He'd insisted on coming, said he wanted to hear how it ended. My lawyer leaned over and whispered, "Don't respond. Let it sit." But I wasn't going to anyway. I already knew something they didn't. Because just that morning, right before we left the house, Jaden came up to me and said, "Mom, Dad told me to delete something." I paused, already bracing for heartbreak. "What was it?" I asked gently. He looked down at his shoes and whispered, "Do you trust me?" I nodded. Always. And then he looked up with that quiet bravery I'd come to know in him. "Then let me show the judge. I kept it. It's the only folder that isn't empty." I didn't even know what that meant yet, but I knew the look in his eyes. He was steady, focused, a boy raised on truth, trying to breathe in a house built on lies. And right then, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Not rage. Not revenge. Just clarity. Because this wasn't about Bryce anymore. This wasn't about me winning. This was about my son reclaiming something no one should have taken from him in the first place. His voice. So when Bryce smirked and said, "Let her take the kid, I'll keep my reputation," and Gerald added, "She can have the mistakes she made," I did something that scared them more than any shouting ever could. I smiled, a calm, deliberate smile, and I watched Bryce shift in his chair for the first time, because deep down, he knew. He'd raised a mirror, and that mirror had receipts. You see, people like Bryce, they live for control, for the performance, the perception, the polished, Instagram-filtered illusion. But they never expect the quiet ones to speak. They never imagine that the softest voice in the room might carry the sharpest truth. And when that truth finally hits them, it's not loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers, like a fuse. And ours was already lit. So, yeah, he thought this would be easy. He thought he'd leave me broken, fighting for scraps of visitation while he polished his public image. What he didn't know was that his own son had watched, listened, saved everything. And when the moment came in court, when the judge looked at Jaden and asked if he wanted to say anything, Bryce's entire plan cracked open. Because Jaden stood steady as stone and said, "May I show the judge what my dad told me to delete?" Bryce's lawyer lunged for the phone. Too late. Before all the courtrooms and lawyers, before my son stood up and shattered the lies, we were just a family. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. I met Bryce Donovan when I was 22. I was a nursing student working night shifts, and he was already knee-deep in his real estate career, polished, persuasive, with a smile that turned heads and a voice that sold dreams. He used to show up to my job with coffee and say, "You save lives, I just sell square footage." It felt like love. He felt like safety. But I see now it wasn't safety. It was strategy. Bryce didn't love me. He loved how I made him look. I was quiet, low maintenance, and easily impressed back then. I didn't challenge him. I fit the role. My mom, Lorna, saw it early on. She said something once I'll never forget. "A man who polishes his image that much is hiding cracks. You just haven't seen the break yet." I laughed her off, called her bitter from her own divorce. But she wasn't bitter. She was experienced. I just didn't know it yet. Bryce proposed 6 months in. Fast, right? But he was charming, and I was tired. Tired of struggling, tired of waiting tables, tired of being alone. He offered something solid. At first, we were okay. I stayed home when Jaden was born. Bryce wanted it that way. "Let me provide," he said. "Just focus on being a good mom." And I did. I poured myself into that little boy. Jaden was the kind of baby who stared straight into your soul, who giggled at nothing and cried at everything. Sensitive, thoughtful, always watching. Bryce, though? He started to shift, slowly at first. He didn't come home for dinner as often, didn't change diapers, didn't ask about the milestones. And when I tried to talk about it, he brushed it off with that perfectly rehearsed smile. "You overthink everything, Lena. You're exhausted. Take a nap or something." The gaslighting didn't come like a slap. It came like drip torture. "You're too emotional. You're imagining it. Don't be dramatic in front of Jaden." By the time Jaden was 5, I'd stopped arguing back. I thought keeping the peace was the right thing. For him, for our family. But Jaden noticed. Even as a kid, he'd ask, "Why does Daddy never say sorry?" Or worse, "Why do you always say sorry even when he's mean?" When Bryce's company took off, he got worse. He was rarely home. When he was cold, detached, unless we had company, of course. Then he was husband of the year. Big gestures, arm around my shoulder, even called me babe, which he hadn't done in years. I played along. I thought, maybe it's just a phase. Maybe if I try harder, be more supportive, smile more. But the more I shrank to fit his world, the less he saw me. And Jaden? He started getting quiet, too. He'd sit by the window and wait for Bryce's car to pull in, then run upstairs before he even walked through the door. I'd find him with headphones on, drawing, always watching. Then one night, I'll never forget it, we were brushing our teeth side by side, and out of nowhere, he said, "Mom, if you're always sad, does that mean you're the problem?" I froze. I didn't even realize I'd been crying silently. Again. That was when something in me shifted. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was shaping my son, teaching him what love looks like, what silence means, what's worth tolerating. Still, it took another year before I left. It wasn't a big dramatic blow-up. No screaming, no cops, no shattered glass. It was Tuesday. Jaden had brought home a drawing from school, 3 stick figures, him, me, and Bryce. Me and Jaden were smiling. Bryce's face was scribbled out in black. I asked gently, "Why did you do that?" He said, "Because Dad said not to tell anyone what he says. So I just made him go quiet." That night, I packed a bag. I stayed with my sister Rhea for 3 weeks while I sorted out housing and paperwork. I thought Bryce would ignore us, move on with his life. But I underestimated how much he valued one thing above all else: control. He didn't care that I left. He cared that people might ask why. And once the custody papers hit his desk, Bryce decided to play dirty. He weaponized the only thing he thought I couldn't afford to lose: my role as a mother. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to destroy me quietly with a polished smile and a lie that sounded just reasonable enough to believe. What he didn't count on, what none of them counted on, was Jaden. The papers came in a black envelope. That's how Bryce always did things. Dramatic packaging for underhanded content. I remember the smell of the envelope before I even opened it. Expensive cologne and ink. The scent of a man who wanted to look clean while doing something dirty. I sat on the edge of my bed, knees shaking, and read the words. Petitioner seeks full custody due to concerns over respondent's mental stability and inability to provide a structured environment. Mental stability. Unstructured. Those weren't just legal phrases. They were weapons. Bryce wasn't fighting for Jaden. He was fighting for a narrative, one where I was too emotional, unfit, and unreliable, a woman unraveling. And because I had no money, no family lawyer on retainer, and no polished PR smile, I was supposed to crumble, quietly. I called my mom the same night. I hadn't spoken to her much since I left Bryce. I'd been too ashamed. But when she picked up and I told her, she just sighed. "He's scared, Lena. Scared people lie louder." Then she said something I'll never forget. "He thinks your silence was weakness." He never realized it was restraint. I wish that had comforted me, but in that moment, I was terrified. Didn't care about winning. I cared about keeping Jaden safe, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And I knew what Bryce was capable of when he felt like he was losing control. Soon after, things got worse. Jaden started coming home from weekend visits with his shoulders tighter and his words shorter. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his food untouched and his iPad unopened. Drawing used to be his escape. Now it was silent. One evening, while I was washing dishes, he stood in the doorway and said, "Dad says you're going to try to turn me against him." I froze. I turned off the faucet and faced him. "Did he say that?" "He says if I tell the judge I don't want to live with you, he can make sure we go on a trip to Disneyland." I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream, but I just bent down and looked him in the eyes. "Jaden, you never have to lie for anyone, not even me. You hear me?" He nodded slowly. "I just want to tell the truth." "Then that's what we'll do." That night, after he went to bed, I checked his tablet. Not because I didn't trust him, but because something didn't sit right. There it was, a string of messages from Bryce. "Delete this after reading. Remember what we talked about. Be smart. Your mom is unstable. This is why I'm trying to help you. If they ask, say she yells a lot. Just say it makes you nervous." He was using my son as a pawn, coaching him, manipulating him, grooming him to tell a story. The same way he used to coach me into staying silent. My hands were shaking, but I took screenshots, every message, every timestamp. I showed them to my original lawyer the next day. You'd think they would have reacted with outrage, but instead I got a careful, clinical shrug. Family court is unpredictable. Judges tend to favor routine and financial stability. Bryce has both. I stared at him. "Are you saying I should just give up?" "I'm saying you should consider what you can live with. Full custody might not be realistic." That night, I sat on the bathroom floor, knees pulled to my chest, and sobbed. I felt like I was screaming underwater. Bryce had taken everything. My confidence, my peace, and now he wanted my child. But then Jaden knocked gently on the door. I wiped my face and cracked it open. He stood there in his pajamas, holding his tablet. "Mom," he whispered. "I didn't delete it, any of it. He told me to. But I made a folder and hid it." He held it out to me, eyes serious. "I don't want to lie anymore. I want someone to know what he really says when no one's looking." That was the moment I stopped being afraid. That was the moment I realized something vital. My son didn't need me to be perfect. He needed me to be brave. I called a new lawyer the next day, Alyssa Shaw. Sharp, no nonsense, trauma-informed. I told her everything. She listened. Then she said, "Good, because you're not just going to fight. You're going to win, and we're going to do it by telling the truth." There's a moment every mother faces when she realizes she's no longer just protecting her child. She's learning from him. For me, that moment came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in a sunlit office with clean white walls and a woman named Alyssa Shaw sitting across from me with a yellow legal pad and a steel spine. Alyssa wasn't like the first lawyer. She didn't sugarcoat things, but she didn't look through me either. After listening to everything, the texts, the manipulation, the threats disguised as fatherly advice, she set her pen down and asked just one question. "Are you ready to fight this? Not emotionally, not morally, legally?" I looked down at my lap. My hands were still sore from wringing each other raw the night before. I thought of Jaden, of that folder, of the quiet courage in his voice when he said, "I didn't delete it, Mom." I looked back at her and said, "I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this because he can't grow up thinking silence is love." Alyssa nodded once. "Then let's get to work." That's when everything changed. I stopped reacting. I started recording. I documented every text, every voicemail, every backhanded message Bryce sent when he thought he was being clever. I created a timeline. Every manipulation attempt, every lie, every quiet pressure point. Alyssa walked me through building a case brick by brick, not on emotion but on evidence. She also connected me with a therapist, not for court optics, for me. For Jaden. Someone trained in trauma response and parental alienation. Someone who could help us untangle what Bryce had been trying to twist. Jaden began opening up more, not dramatically, just little comments here and there that revealed more than he realized. Dad said you'd cry your way out of court. He said judges hate unstable women. He told me to say I missed him more, even if I didn't. Every time, my heart clenched. but I stayed calm. I didn't contradict him. I didn't trash talk his father. I just listened. And then I wrote it all down. Alyssa prepped us both for court. She walked Jaden through what would happen, gently, professionally, never leading him. And Jaden? He took it all in like a little soldier, not out of anger, not to get back at Bryce, because he wanted the lying to stop. One night I found him alone in his room, headphones in, watching a video on how to speak clearly in court. I sat beside him and asked, "Are you okay?" He looked at me and said, "I'm scared, but I'm more scared of growing up and thinking lying is normal." I hugged him so tightly that night I felt like my arms might break. By the time the court date came, we were ready, but that didn't mean I wasn't terrified. The morning of the hearing, Bryce sent one final message. "I know you're going to pull something. It won't work. Judges don't like desperate women." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I looked at Jaden in the rearview mirror on the way to court. He was quiet, holding his phone. Not with fear, with resolve. "Are you sure?" I asked. "You don't have to do anything that makes you uncomfortable." He nodded. "I kept everything, Mom, the messages, the recordings. I even saved his voice note, the one where he says to lie." I blinked back tears. "Why did you keep it?" I whispered. He shrugged a little. "Because one day, I knew someone would believe me." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just my fight. Jaden had made a decision too. He wasn't just the child caught in the middle. He was the truth teller. And when we walked into that courtroom, him in his little navy suit, me gripping a folder full of facts and fears, I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel broken or unstable or any of the things Bryce had tried to label me. I felt like a mother standing beside her son, not hiding, not shrinking, ready. The courtroom was freezing, not physically, but in that way where time feels still, like you're stuck underwater and everyone around you is just watching the surface ripple. Family court Tuesday morning. The judge wore a gray robe and the weight of 50 other cases on her shoulders. But when she looked at me and Bryce and then at Jaden, I swear something shifted in the room. Jaden sat next to me, hands folded over his phone, his little navy blazer buttoned all wrong. I wanted to fix it. I almost did. But then I stopped myself. He wanted to be here as he was. Brave, real, unedited. Across the aisle, Bryce looked flawless. Of course he did. Tailored navy suit, cufflinks, that annoying smile that always said, "I know something you don't." His lawyer was a tall, sleek man named David Marks, who gave off the energy of someone who smelled weakness like blood. When the hearing began, they went first. David stood and launched into a speech that sounded like it had been written by a PR team. Mr. Donovan is a committed father. He has a stable income, a secure home, and no history of criminal activity or instability. The mother, however, has exhibited behaviors consistent with emotional unpredictability and an inability to provide consistent structure for the child. I bit my tongue so hard it bled. Then Bryce took the stand. He said all the right things. Polished lies dipped in just enough truth to sound believable. I'm not trying to take Jaden away from his mother. I just want what's best for him. She's overwhelmed. She needs help. I'm offering structure. The judge nodded along, scribbled notes, glanced over at me but gave nothing away. Then it was our turn. My lawyer, Alyssa, was calm as ever. She didn't start with emotion. She started with facts. The texts, the voice notes, the visitation inconsistencies, the manipulation. Then, with quiet confidence, she said, "Your Honor, we would like to call Jaden to speak. He requested to address the court." The judge looked surprised. "Is he prepared?" I turned to look at my son. His eyes met mine. He nodded once. He stepped up to the microphone with the kind of calm that silenced the room. Even Bryce's smug expression dropped, just for a second. The judge leaned forward. "Jaden, would you like to tell us how you feel about living with your parents?" Jaden didn't flinch. "I love both of my parents, but only one of them tells me the truth." That sentence hit like thunder. My dad told me to say certain things so the judge would choose him. He said if I said Mom yells a lot, I could live with him and go to Disneyland. He paused. You could have heard a pin drop. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket. "May I show the judge what Dad told me to delete?" Before the judge could respond, David, Bryce's lawyer, stood up fast. "Objection, Your Honor, we haven't reviewed—" The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Marks." Jaden walked to the bailiff and handed over the phone. The judge reviewed the contents in silence for a full 3 minutes. You could see her face change with each new message. Her eyebrows knit tighter, her mouth flattened. There was an audio file. She pressed play, and there it was. Bryce's voice, clear as crystal. "Just say Mom makes you nervous. Cry a little if you can. Don't worry, they'll believe you." I looked over at Bryce. His lawyer was pale. Bryce was frozen, jaw clenched, eyes darting around like he could escape the room by sheer willpower. The judge set the phone down slowly and looked up. Her voice was low, deliberate, and somehow louder than any shouting. "Mr. Donovan, would you like to explain this recording?" Bryce opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Jaden stepped back to his seat beside me and whispered, "Did I do okay?" I smiled and kissed the top of his head. "You did better than okay. You told the truth." What happened next was swift. The judge ruled for sole custody in my favor, citing parental manipulation and psychological coercion. Bryce was granted supervised visits pending a psychological evaluation. David Marks tried to object again. The judge shut him down. "This court does not tolerate manipulation of minors. Consider this your only warning." As we stood to leave, Gerald, Bryce's father, stormed out of the courtroom. Loud enough for everyone to hear, he hissed, "That boy is soft like his mother. He just destroyed our family's name." I turned back and said, not angrily, just truthfully, "No." He saved it. Because in that courtroom, my son didn't just expose a lie. He rewrote the story they tried to force on both of us. The courthouse was quiet when we stepped outside. It was strange. After weeks of preparing, months of stress, years of holding my breath in that marriage, it was finally over. No shouting, no confetti, just the sound of my son's footsteps beside mine and a breeze that felt new. Jaden was clutching my hand, his little fingers laced tightly through mine. I could tell he didn't want to let go. Neither did I. "Are we going home now?" he asked. I looked at him, studied his face. Calm, a little tired, but not scared. "Yeah, baby, we're going home." We walked down the steps together. No cameras, no audience, just the two of us walking out of the shadow of someone else's lies. But that didn't mean the damage disappeared. The next few weeks were quieter, but not easier. Bryce didn't show up for his first supervised visit. No call, no explanation. Jaden waited on the front steps in his new sneakers for almost an hour before coming inside and saying he probably had something more important. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my phone and demand answers. But I didn't. Because this time, I wasn't going to fix what I didn't break. Instead, I held Jaden close and said, "You are the most important thing, and one day you're going to see that the people who show up, they're the ones who matter." A week later, we sat down with his therapist, a woman named Teresa, who had this gift of hearing what kids meant, not just what they said. Jaden told her, "It feels weird now. I used to think lying kept people together." And she said gently, "Sometimes people teach you their brokenness without meaning to, but you taught the truth instead. That's not weird, Jaden. That's strong." I watched his shoulders relax. I hadn't seen him sit like that in months, not braced for impact, not flinching for someone else's approval. And I realized then, the truth didn't just set us free. It made space for something new, something clean. I started working again, part-time at a small clinic across town. Nothing glamorous, but it gave me purpose. Routine, a reminder that I was still me, not just the ex-wife in a custody battle. And Jaden? He started drawing again, not just scribbles in black. He used color again, whole landscapes, people with smiles that weren't forced. One night, he showed me a sketch. It was of me, standing on a hill holding his hand. Behind us was a shadow with no face. I asked, "What's this?" He smiled. "That's us. After." I framed it the next day. People think the hardest part is leaving. It's not. The hardest part is believing you were never crazy to begin with, that your gut was right, that your silence wasn't weakness, it was restraint, that what they called instability was actually just the toll of holding everyone else's chaos. I wish I could say Bryce changed, but he didn't. His father, Gerald, stopped calling. Last I heard, he told the family I set them up with a manipulative son, as if an 11-year-old could orchestrate court strategy, as if Jaden wasn't just brave enough to speak. But honestly, I don't care what they think anymore, because I stopped living in the court of public opinion the moment my son stood up in that real courtroom and told the truth. You know, I used to pray for the storm to end. Now I realize the storm didn't destroy us. It washed everything false away. Jaden and I still have hard days. There are questions I can't answer, gaps I can't fill. But every morning he wakes up in a home where he is believed, where he is safe, where no one is asking him to choose loyalty over honesty. That's a victory, the biggest one. If you're watching this and you're stuck in a situation where the truth feels too quiet to matter, let me say this. Lies are loud, but truth is patient. Truth doesn't need to yell. It just needs time. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't just expose what's false. It sets fire to it. So to the women being told to settle, to silence, to play nice, and to the children being coached to protect someone else's image, you're not crazy. You're not unstable. You're just standing in the quiet before your moment comes. And when it does, let the truth speak, loud enough to break what silence never could. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt gaslit, silenced, or made to doubt what you know is true, you're not alone, and you're not weak. You're just surviving something heavy. If you found strength or clarity in this video, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment below. Your voice matters more than you know. And if you want more real stories about resilience, truth, and reclaiming your power, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more to tell, so do you.